Right. Well, I think having allowed just a little bit of time for those who are unfamiliar with this, as I said, remote part of the NUS campus to find us, I think it is time for us to start. First off, I'd like to say what a pleasure it is for us to see quite a few visitors to ISAS. I think we're worried that with the move here from Bukit Timah campus that it would be much more difficult for many outsiders to attend our events. It's lovely that so many of you have been able to find us this afternoon. Welcome. And it's also for me a great pleasure to introduce my good friend Dr. Ronojoy Sen. I'm not going to spend a long time giving you Ronojoy's CV and all of the rest of it, because there's quite a good account of that on one side of the order paper for the afternoon. But I think I'll just mention that Ronojoy is a senior research fellow here at ISAS and has been with the Institute for about 3 years now. Ronojoy has a PhD in political science, though I personally am very happy it's not the more scientific kind of political science, from the University of Chicago, and has a distinguished academic record, but has also for quite a long time worked as a journalist, notably with the editorial pages of the Times of India. So, Ronojoy is a person who sort of spans the world of journalism and of academia. So, without any further ado, Ronojoy, the floor is yours. Game changer in India. What to expect in the national elections? A subject of passing interest.
Right. Thanks, John, for the kind introduction. So what I'll do is I'll look a little bit at the earlier elections, particularly the 2009 elections, a few general trends before sort of going on to the sort of main item in the menu, what to expect, which is always sort of the difficult bit, forecasting for general elections in India. So just a few highlights of the elections to give you a scale of the enormity of what the entire exercise is like. Spread over 9 phases, 815 million voters, an incredible number, which is a significant jump from 2009. Significantly, a large number of voters are first-time voters. The number, there's a little bit of dispute. I've got this number from the Election Commission's press note from February, but there are other figures being bandied about, 100 million, some even put it at 150 million. Some of the discrepancies are partly because of the definition of first time. So if you define first time voters as voters voting for the first time in a Lok Sabha or a national election, that's one definition. But there are voters who've not voted for a Lok Sabha elections but have voted for assembly or state elections between 2009, when the last election was held, and 2014. Several states have actually gone to elections over the last few years. So, do you identify them as first time voters? So I think that's one of the reasons why the discrepancies are coming up. There are a huge number of polling stations, and finally, an option to cast, a none of the above vote, which there had been a campaign for a while. A Supreme Court, there was a petition, public interest litigation filed, and finally, we have the option in this election. And I recall, when I first went to vote, I didn't want to vote for any of the candidates, and I think I wasted my vote by giving it, casting it for an independent candidate, I think, whose poll symbol was a pair of spectacles. So I think that is a conundrum that we can sort of avoid by casting a nota vote. So to quickly go over why a game changer, and this is a list, by no means comprehensive, some of the general aspects of why this election might be a game changer. I'll come back later in the final bit of my talk to some of the specific aspects. So as I mentioned, the huge cohort of young voters, then the anti-corruption mood of the electorate, stemming from the Anna Hazare's movement in 2011, formation of the Aam Aadmi Party, which some people expect could usher in systemic changes. The primacy of economic and development questions, or issues over questions of religion and caste, which seem to be, or seem to have been the sort of defining features of early elections. A vote against criminality and political dynasty, and finally the impact of social media. Again, this is not a comprehensive list, but some of the more important reasons as to why some people are seeing the coming election to be a game changer. So let me now look at some data on some of these aspects. Again, I'm not going into any great detail about each of these aspects because they could actually be a presentation in itself. So first, the voter turnout, because this is linked to the fact that there will be so many first-time voters this time, and there's an expectation by many that there might be a spike in voting. So if you see the Election Commission statistics, the voter turnout has been fairly consistent over the years, around that sort of 60% mark. And I should mention that there is some controversy about the first two elections. There are some standard works where you will find the voting turnout in 1952 and 57, the first two elections actually being shown as below 50. So there is, they're roughly pegged at around the 45% figure, and then they come up to in the high 50s, low 60s. But that has stemmed from a discrepancy in the Election Commission data. And the Election Commission itself, for the first two elections, has a set of data which puts the turnout for the first two elections at under 50. But they have sort of a combined data put out by the Election Commission more recently, which is from where I get these statistics. So, there is the Election Commission itself has, one of the commissioners has in a statement said that they are expecting, closer to 70% this time. Now, I don't know on what basis, but so there is a possibility that the election turnout might be significantly higher than last time when it was under 60, and this could contribute in different ways to the outcome and maybe possibly sort of game-changing nature. Now, the youth vote, which has been the subject of our speculation and an expectation that it might lead to systemic changes in the polity. And this is data got from the National Election Survey in 2009. I just should mention that the National Election Survey is done by the Center for Study of Developing Societies, CSDS, and they've been doing these election-related surveys from the late 1960s, 1967, if I'm not wrong. So they are, probably one of the most sort of credible organizations, and of course with a much longer history than some of the other polling, other organizations that do opinion surveys of this sort. And what this data shows is, the blue band is what the Congress overall vote was in 2009, and that's just, and so on for BJP, the left, and the BSP. These are the four parties of the left. Is not a party; it's a combination. It's a left front of four parties: CPM, the CPI, RSP, and the Forward Bloc. And the BSP is the Bahujan Samaj Party, the party of the lower castes, led by Mayawati, primarily with a base in UP. So 28.6% was the overall vote that the Congress got, and 28% was what it got from the youth. And the youth, I must say, I should specify what it was. The CSDS pegged it at 35 and under. It might not seem to be too youthful for many countries, but that's where it pegged the area. So what this shows is that the overall the voting the voter the percentage for any party did not significantly differ from the youth component. So the youth component, the under 35s, did not vote significantly differently from the other age groups. So this is and this has I haven't put the data for the earlier elections. Roughly from NES has been collecting this data, I think, from 1997 or maybe 1999, and the trend has been very much similar. The young voters have not voted significantly different from the rest of the voters. So this is something to keep in mind, whether this same situation will be played out in this election or will it be significantly different because of the various reasons, maybe the unhazard movement, the anti-corruption movement. So that's something that's really up in the air. And now come another aspect that I mentioned about when I was talking about game changing, whether sort of economic issues, issues that impact the daily lives of voters are increasingly becoming more important than, say, the staples of Indian politics, caste, identity, so on and so forth. And this is again from NES 2009, where as you can see, drinking water sort of tops the list of most important issues, followed by unemployment, electricity. So this is the sort of classic, bijli, sarak, pani, bijli, electricity, sarak, road, pani, water in Hindi, sort of playing out as what are sort of the most important issues for voters. In 2014, there has been a survey done by the Center of Advanced Studies at the University of Pennsylvania in conjunction with the Carnegie Endowment in Washington. And what they're doing is they want to talk to the same set of respondents over 5 years, and this is the sort of initial set of findings, where, as you can see, economic growth tops the list of the most important issue for voters, followed by corruption, inflation. Now, if you just go back, the economic growth, corruption don't figure in 2009. Now, one could ascribe this to the present climate, of anti-corruption movements, etc. But one must also mention, all surveys have their methodologies, and I'm not a real sort of expert in quantitative in numbers, but I did look up the methodology followed, and for the UPenn survey, what they did was they actually gave a list of items to the respondents, unlike the earlier survey, which asked them to sort of name the issues in random. So here they had a list, and corruption was there, and so so unlike in the earlier survey, they weren't prompted. So here there was some prompting involved. So amongst the 8 or 9 issues, the respondents listed corruption as the single most, economic growth as the single most important issue, followed by corruption and inflation. Inflation, again, I think is a staple of most elections. It's a common saying that the prices of onions can bring down a government, if nothing else can. So that's, I think, common to most elections. We're talking about identity again when we're talking about the game-changing aspect. And here I have a slide on the Muslim vote share, which is, for obvious reasons, an important issue in this election with Narendra Modi and his sort of negative image that he has with Muslim voters in India. And as you can see, the Congress has consistently won, and this is again from 1996, won a larger chunk of the Muslim vote than other parties. So it's between 30 and goes up to sort of 40 in 1999, but between the 30 to 40 band. And the BJP, which is the line in red, has it's been around below or maybe slightly above the 5% mark. So it's never really made a dent, again for obvious reasons, being a Hindu nationalist party. It has not made a dent with the Muslim electorate. And the other two parties are the left parties in green and the Samajwadi in purple. And the Samajwadi party and the left, arguably, are parties that are restricted to one state or a couple of states. So Samajwadi party is very much a party of Uttar Pradesh, the largest state in India, whereas the left is now, it wasn't the case earlier, very much confined to Kerala, West Bengal, and the tiny state of Tripura in northeast. So their numbers are, of course, skewed by the fact that they don't have a national presence, unlike the Congress. So the Samajwadi party does win, as you can see, almost 25% of the Muslim vote share, and that's significant that in the sense that they contest only from one state. So Samajwadi party does win a lot of Muslim votes in EP. I don't have a slide on caste because it kind of tends to get too complicated, and I don't want to sort of subject this audience to these different caste connotations. But briefly, one should mention that the voting patterns of caste have been fairly stable till 2009. The upper caste, the BJP gets more of the upper caste votes, whereas the Congress and parties like the BSP get more of the scheduled caste. That's named for the former Dalits, the former untouchables of Dalits. And then there are parties like the Samajwadi Party in UP, the Rashtriya Janata Dal in Bihar, which get more of the other backward classes, or the OBC, the lower castes who are above the scheduled castes or below the upper castes. It gets a little complicated when you sort of, the entire category of OBC is somewhat complicated. I don't want to go into that, but I'm happy to discuss it if there are any questions. But so the caste pattern has been fairly stable. But this election again, there is, some of the preliminary surveys do suggest that the BJP might be making inroads into the OBC votes in particular. Narendra Modi himself is an OBC and has been playing on that quite a bit. So the BJP might be making inroads into that, and they of course already have their vote bank in the upper caste, which are the Brahmins, the Rajputs, etc. So there is that sort of phenomenon happening where the caste equations might be changing too. Besides the fact, the larger question of how relevant these questions are for this election. Now, what I have here is the percentage of votes won in rural and urban constituencies, and this was something John had a internal in-house presentation this morning where this issue came up. There is a feeling, or a lot of people believe that the Congress actually gets more votes in rural areas as opposed to urban areas. And what this shows is this is only for 2004. I couldn't get comparable statistics for 2009. I don't think it was significantly different. And why 2004 is, 2004 is the election where the BJP campaigned on a Shining India platform. And the conventional logic was that the rural vote bank rejected this the campaign strategy of the BJP, and the Congress really won on the back of this sort of huge rural support base. But here we can see that the Congress is in the blue bar. The Congress is getting actually more urban votes than rural votes, and that's the case with the BJP too. For the other parties, roughly similar. So it's not that there is a huge difference between the urban and the rural votes for both the Congress and the BJP. So that's something that we need to keep in mind when we discuss this kind of then. Also, another fact to keep in mind is that in 2004 and in 2009, there has increasingly been more urbanization. So there would be more constituencies that could be classified as urban rather than rural in the current context. Now, I mentioned dynasty, and this data is from Patrick French's India portrait. Some of you might be familiar with this. In fact, I think the book, it's a well-written book, but I think it partly became famous with this one chapter on hereditary MPs, and because he didn't do the data crunching, he got someone in Noida, I believe, to sort of do the data. But it was fairly simple. I think he just got together data on MPs, and this is not MPs who are whose fathers are necessarily politicians, but who loosely have come from a political family. So they could be cousin of an MP, sons, daughters, but basically from a political family. So that's how they mapped it, and it's kind of astonishing that all 100% of MPs below 30 belong to such political dynasties or political families. So and as you can see, the number keeps going down. The older, so above 81, and there are a lot of MPs who are in India being politicians who retire in India. So the above 81 there's zero, but it's a secular rise. So it's a fairly sort of interesting figure. The other is criminality, because of this mood of anti-corruption and criminality of, and again these this data over the last decade or so, there are organizations that have been getting together this data from the affidavits of MPs, tracking down their past records, and as you can see, there's been an increase in from 2004 to 2009 in not only MPs with criminal records. Now, there are some MPs who would argue that they have a criminal record because they were protesting something, maybe price rise. So does that really count as a criminal record? But when we look at MPs with serious criminal charges, so they've classified it this particular organization as it's either murder, kidnapping, rape. The crimes are considered serious under the provisions of the Indian Penal Code, and there too you see a significant rise from 2004 to 2009. And the complete data for 2014 is not available because filing of nominations are still going on. In some constituencies, the ones that go to election early, the filing is over, but there are still plenty of constituencies, so we don't really have the final data. But going by trends, there is really no falling off of candidates with criminal records. So it's not as if this current climate or mood in India has led to a falling off of candidates with criminal antecedents. Of course, how many of them will get elected, we don't know. But if you look at the data on who are filing nominations, the trend seems to be similar. Actually, we'll have the final data very soon. I think when the final cutoff happens in April, we'll have the consolidated data on candidates. But here, if you look at the parties, now it's often argued that Congress gets the stick for almost everything in India, and the BJP at one time was really seen as a party with a difference. When especially in the late 90s, when they were contesting or they were serious contenders for government in India. But as you can see, that the Congress doesn't do badly in MPs with pending cases. In fact, they have a lower number of MPs with both pending criminal cases as well as criminal cases with serious charges, and the BJP doesn't actually do very well on this count. And so you have the Samajwadi Party, the BSP, and the last party is the unfortunately there are a lot of acronyms in India which you have to keep up with. The JDU is the Janata Dal United, which is a party very much confined to the eastern state of Bihar, where the Chief Minister Nitish Kumar is sort of seen as having turned around the state of Bihar, which has always had the sort of worst indicators on all counts. And you can see the JDU actually does the worst on this count. So sometimes there is no correlation between a party that is seen to be sort of there can be an argument about what Nitish Kumar and the JDU has done, but at least the perception is that they've done fairly well on governance. But if you look at the number of MPs with criminal records, they seem to be doing the worst. So then again, that's a sort of anomaly that one needs to be pointed out. The media influence, and I did mention the influence of social media. And this is again the NES 2009 data on the respondents were asked about newspapers, TV, and you have the data. Many of them, newspapers and TV they do watch, but the somewhat shocking data is for the internet, where 96% of the respondents said that they never use the internet for accessing election-related information. Now that could very well have changed, between 2009 and 2014. Internet penetration has increased. I don't have the latest numbers, but it's still internet penetration is quite low in India, so compared to a lot of countries, but it has increased. What's not here, and what my good friend and our colleague who's not here, Robin Jeffrey, would consistently stress is cell phones. I think arguably the cell phone might be actually playing a greater role in both accessing and disseminating election-related information, and that is something I guess I'm sure there'd be surveys that would be looking at this, because much of this I think the access to the cell phone is far more in India, as most people are aware. Again, I don't have the exact numbers, but it's almost becoming universal access, and that is I think used much more, I would argue, say, the internet, particularly, and the television and the newspaper to access and disseminate, because a lot of parties are now using the internet to send out messages. They have the lists of voters that they're getting, and then they're sending out campaign messages. So that's something to note. Now I just want to quickly move on to some of the party-related statistics. Again, I don't want to go in great detail into this. Just to note that this is from the first election in 52 to the last election, 2009. The blue line is the Congress, very much dominant in the early years. It's only in 77 that it dips to around 150 seats. The People's House of the Lok Sabha has 543 seats now. The numbers have changed a little bit over the years. And in 77, this is right after the state of emergency that was declared by Indira Gandhi. For the first time, the Congress actually loses power, and a coalition of parties called, under the broad umbrella of the Janata, which means people. So the Janata Party comes to power. And then again in the Congress, the graph goes up in 84 dramatically. This is after Indira Gandhi's assassination and the huge sympathy wave in favor of her son Rajiv Gandhi. And from then on, it's declined, and now sort of, it is. I'll come to the percentage a little later. It's sort of stabilized at between 150 to 200. For the last, it did go down once to 114. This was in 1999, which was the lowest ever won by the Congress. And the second party seats, the early years, as you can see, it's under 50. It's actually the communist parties which do well in the early elections. So it's the undivided Communist Party of India, the CPI, which is doing well. The communists split in the early 60s. Again, thicket of acronyms. So now you have the Communist Party of India undivided, the CPI, and then you have the bigger party, which is the Communist Party of India Marxist, CPIM. So both, the left parties actually have done reasonably well over the elections from 52 to 2009. The other parties that did well, there were some parties that came up, like the Swatantra Party under people like C. Rajagopalachari in the early 60s, did particularly well in the 1960 elections, but then sort of faded out. The Jana Sangh, which was a precursor to the BJP, did fairly well in the 70s, so on and so forth. And from the late 90s, you really have the phenomenon of the regional parties, Samajwadi Party, the BSP, and various other state parties which started doing well. So the two national parties, and let me just come to the next bit, where from 1989 there is a shift. So you have the regional parties on one hand, and the BJP really comes to the fore from the 80s, riding on the back of the Ayodhya Ram Janmabhoomi movement. So in 84, the BJP actually had 2 seats in parliament, and then it jumps up to something like 80 odd. So it's a dramatic rise from 84 to 89, and since then, they've been fairly consistent in the vote share. So you can see in 1998, actually the two, Congress vote share and the BJP vote share converges, and then the Congress was slightly up, but the gap is not as nowhere as significant as what the Congress had in the early years. And as I was saying, in this period, you do have a lot of regional parties in the fray. So the Congress and the BJP combined, don't get more than 50% of the vote share. And this is just the numbers for the last election. The Congress 206, BJP. The Congress forms the government as part of a coalition, the United Progressive Alliance, where they cross the simple majority mark. And this is the vote share, as I was saying, in the earlier. So in 2009, you have Congress, which after 29%, and BJP was 19%. The point here is that with a lot of the regional parties in the fray, despite them, the Congress and the BJP do sort of end up getting, something like 45% of the vote. They don't cross the 50% mark, but they do get, if not half, close to half half the percentage of votes in India. So, despite the proliferation of regional parties, these two parties, these two national parties, do sort of have a consistent vote share. And this is important when people kind of write off the Congress. And the Congress still does have, it can fluctuate, but it does have a constituency in India, and that's important. And you can see the other parties. The left still manages to get a significant vote share. If you look at it in the national perspective, the ESP, Samajwadi, as I said, is UP, and Trinamool Congress is sort of a later entrant into Indian politics, a breakaway party of the Congress in West Bengal, which gets 3% of the national vote share. But in West Bengal, it's been doing very well in recent times. Okay, so now hopefully I've touched on some of the general themes which have dominated Indian elections and election analysis, till right from 1952 to 2009. Now a little bit about the what's going to happen, the forecasting. So it's been raining opinion surveys in India, and I think this time there are more opinion surveys than last time, and every year it keeps increasing. I've just chosen two. CSDS, I mean, for obvious reasons. As I said, the CSDS has the longest history of doing this kind of stuff. And also, they have a sort of system in place where they have people who worked on different states for several years now. So these are sort of academics, based in one of the state universities. So, someone like Suhas Palshikar, say, in Maharashtra, so on and so forth. So you have a sort of local academy, then they have a team of people. So they've been doing this, and I think they have fairly good people who've been doing the surveys, and I think they've been reasonably good in the predictions. Although 2004 was one election, when with the BJP India Shining campaign, etc., where I think most people, including opinion polls, forecast a victory for the BJP-led coalition. That didn't happen, but. Other than that, I think the CSDS has been reasonably good in watching. So you can see the BJP, the coalition, forecast is between 210 to 230 seats. The Congress, in a much worse situation. Amongst the regional parties, I just mentioned the Trinamool. They look like ending up being the third largest party with something around 30 odd seats, followed by the ADMK, which is a party from Tamil Nadu. So you have, again, a lot of acronyms. You have the DMK, which is one wing of the other movement, the other is ADMK. Then the left front, as I said, always a factor in elections, although they've been doing badly in recent times. And then in the other set of parties, in red, I've marked out the Aam Aadmi party, and I'll talk a little bit about them later. I know there's a lot of interest in the Aam Aadmi party and its prospects, and I'm happy to talk about it in the Q&A. The forecast by CSDS is only 1 to 5 seats. This is not the gospel truth, but that's what the CSDS is predicting. This is another one by NDTV, which is most of you are familiar with India would know is one of the bigger television channels, and who has been touting their poll as one of the largest such exercises ever done in India, and they reel out the numbers. And the numbers are not not that different from the earlier CSDS numbers. If you just look at the BJP combined and the Congress combined, roughly similar. And again, not a great difference in the other parties, including the Aam Aadmi party. The CSDS pegs it at between 1 to 5. The CSDS has been somewhat smart. They're given a range, whereas NDTV seems to be super confident. They've actually pinned down the exact numbers. So 4 seats for Aam Aadmi party. Again, not significantly different from the CSDS findings.
Sorry, put it back a moment.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, reckon?
Yeah.
Oh, they've got TDP in with BJP. I see.
Yeah. So TDP is one of the parties, Telugu Desam party, a party from Andhra Pradesh, in talks with the BJP for an alliance, but it seems to now not have worked out. So they were tagged along with BJP. Now they should actually be put separately, which I think in CSDS does. So you have TDP in the middle with a range of 10 to 16 seats, whereas they are put along with the BJP in this survey. So that's it. So, yeah. So there's been also a fairly well publicized survey by Pew Research Center, which some of you are familiar with, the US-based organization, and they did this sort of Modi versus Rahul, the percentage of respondents favorable to Modi versus the percentage favorable to Rahul Gandhi, the two sort of main BJP. Modi is of course the BJP's prime ministerial candidate. Rahul is leading the campaign, not officially declared as the prime ministerial candidate. And you can see there's the interesting thing is that at least according to their survey, which was actually done in 2013. So the survey was done some time ago. The results was published, I think, early this year, but the survey was done earlier. So there is a difference between, in sort of people favorable to, these two candidates. There's a significant lead that Modi enjoyed over all the classes that Pew surveyed. So, men, women, age group, education, as well as sort of the rural-urban divide that we're talking about. Again, these things can change, and whether how you taken these survey results is also the other factor. But this is what the Pew findings show. Now let me quickly move on. Not that much, and I don't want to take up too much time. To some of the key states, and again, I'm not going into any great detail, and I'm happy to talk more in the Q&A. So I'm just looking at the states which have 40 seats or more, which there are 6 of them, which if you add the numbers up, roughly make up 290 odd seats. So much more, more than 50% of the seats in the Lok Sabha. So this is Uttar Pradesh with 80 seats, by far sort of the big daddy in elections, and of course critical. In 2009, the Samajwadi BSP sort of split the honors, but the Congress did surprisingly well last time with 21 seats, and the BJP did surprisingly poorly with 10 seats. And the percentages are there too. And the predictions this time shows a sort of stunning comeback for the BJP, with vote share of CSDS shows them above 35%. The UPenn survey under 30, but over 40 seats, which would be a 4-fold increase. The Congress, a dramatic fall, and the BSP and the Samajwadi Party don't do worse compared to 2009. And the picture I have up there for some visual relief is a man called Amit Shah, who's a trusted lieutenant of Narendra Modi from Gujarat. He's been sent out to take care of BJP's affairs in UP. And some people say that he's playing a fairly critical role in sort of in mobilization and in polarization of the electorate. So we want to talk about that. Maharashtra, 48 seats, the next biggest. Significant difference actually. UP is really the big daddy, 80 seats. No other state comes anywhere close. Again, the Congress and the Congress allied with a party called the Nationalist Congress Party, very similar names, but headed by someone who's a real veteran in politics called Sharad Pawar. So that combined, wins 25 seats, and the BJP allies with the Shiv Sena, which is the sort of nativist Marathi party in Maharashtra. So these are the two opposing sort of combines, and the predictions for this time is almost like a flip from last election. The Congress NCP combine goes down, and the BJP Shiv Sena, and there's another small party, the Republican Party of India, RPI Athawad, which I think had 1 seat earlier. So that's the third coalition member of the BJP combine. So the predictions are that the BJP and the Shiv Sena are going to do much better than last time. And the picture here is of Thackeray, Raj Thackeray, who heads the MNS. Now, MNS actually won 0 seats in the last election, so the 0 has kind of got out of the frame. But he could be seen as a bit of a spoiler because he is the nephew of the late Shiv Sena chief Bal Thackeray, who passed away. Now there's a competition for who inherits his legacy. So this man is a nephew of Bal Thackeray, and Uddhav Thackeray, his cousin, is the son of Bal Thackeray, who heads the Shiv Sena. So there is a contest, and the MNS is under Raj Thackeray is actually contesting all seats being contested by the Shiv Sena. So he might cut into some of the Shiv Sena votes because they have the similar vote bank, which might impact results in some of the urban constituencies where Shiv Sena really has which is the Shiv Sena strong. Andhra Pradesh, 42 seats. The Congress, this was really the state that where the Congress did exceptionally well last time, 33 seats. And this time, as some of you would be following Indian politics would know, there's a bifurcation plan for Andhra Pradesh. It's been passed by Parliament, but not still not official. Where you have two states being created of what was earlier Andhra Pradesh. So one is the Telangana, where Hyderabad is located. The other, not named yet, but sort of informally called Simandra. And so that kind of complicates things. The idea for the Congress was, if it bifurcates Andhra Pradesh, it would win a lot of seats in the Telangana region. But it looks like that might not work out that way. Again, there are a lot of acronyms, and I hate to sort of inflict them on you. There's a party in Telangana called TRS, the Telangana Rashtra Samiti, which is really claiming the credit for the creation of Telangana, and it seems like the predictions are that they might get more of the votes in Telangana. So last time they just had it's a green bar. They just had 2 seats. It might actually increase to between 6 to 12, a very dramatic rise. And in the other part of the sort of state that gets split, in Simandra region, there is a completely new entity, and over the last few years we have seen new political entities come up in the states. And this is an entity called the YSR Congress, which is again a breakaway from the Congress. YSR, Rajshekar Reddy was one of the sort of Congress satraps, a strongman who from Andhra Pradesh, who passed away in a helicopter crash a couple of years ago. So his son, and that's the man in the picture, Jagan Reddy, has formed this new entity called the YSR Congress, which opinion polls are predicting that they will sweep or do very well, at least in the other part of Andhra Pradesh, Simandra. So it's a fairly sort of fluid situation in Andhra Pradesh, but the YSR Congress on a strong wicket, and the Congress really on a sticky one. And this one is really going to impact the Congress's final tally, because 33 seats, if it comes down to something like 6, 10, whatever, it really cut into there. West Bengal, the state where I come from, a little bit more knowledgeable about than the other states. Again, some of you follow Indian politics would sort of know that the left front, the Communist Party, had a sort of record of 34 years in government in West Bengal, which in 2011 they got defeated by the Trinamool. So the last election, Trinamool had, they were already on the ascendancy, they had 19 seats. It's expected that this time they're going to do even better. And the picture in the inset is Mamata Banerjee, the mercurial leader of the Trinamool, prone to making hasty statements. But she's, even though the Trinamool doesn't have much of a record in governance, for the 2 years that he's been in power in West Bengal, her personal popularity seems undimmed, and that's probably one of the reasons why the Trinamool still will do very well and probably turn out to be the third largest party after the Congress and the BJP in the national scenario. The left front in a bit of a mess, haven't really recovered from the 2000 elections where they were voted out of government in the state. So the predictions are they might win around 10 odd seats. The Congress was in alliance with the Trinamool last time. So they did win 6 seats, but this time out of alliance, difficult to say how many seats they'll win. And the BJP has always had a very poor record in West Bengal. They won one seat, that too in the northernmost constituency in Darjeeling, where BJP was backed by the Gorkhas. Again, that's a separate story I don't want to go into, but that was the only seat. It seems like the support base is increasing in West Bengal, from whatever I get the feedback that I get. But again, that might not translate into seats. And finally, Bihar. Bihar again is another place where there is a prediction of a sort of resounding comeback by the BJP, just like Uttar Pradesh. And Bihar has 40 seats, and I should have mentioned West Bengal has 42. And last time it was the Janata Dal United, and the man in the picture is Nitish Kumar, the incumbent chief minister. The JDU did remarkably well, 20 seats. The BJP didn't do too well. The RJD is the Rashtriya Janata Dal, headed by probably the most, in some senses, one of the more charismatic and possibly the funniest politician in India, Lalu Yadav. RJD didn't do well last time, but there are again predictions of a bit of a rebound for them in this elections. But it's the real story is the rebound by the BJP, and again these are predictions, of course, and the sort of dramatic decline of JDU. So the predictions of CSDS is JDU comes down from 20 to under 10, and that again is I think one of the stories of this election. This does happen. Tamil Nadu is the final state. It actually has 39 seats, but along with Pondicherry, or Puducherry as it's called now, which is union territory, makes up 40 seats. So Tamil Nadu is characterized by these cyclical politics. So it's one time it's the DMK. So last time the DMK had 18 seats, and the AIDMK, with the woman in the picture is Jayalalitha, who's the current chief minister, at 9. Since then, Jayalalitha and the ADMK are back in power in Tamil Nadu. They won the state elections a few years ago. So the expectation is that that cyclical politics, Jayalalitha and the ADMK will do well. So the results in some senses will be flipped. But an interesting fact this time is a broad coalition that the BJP has entered into. Again, several acronyms. So you have what? MDMK, PMK, VCK? No, they are not part of the. Anyway, no. So there are 4 parties that the BJP has tied up with, all sort of in some ways sort of splinter parties from the larger sort of Dravidian movement, and that could be a coalition that either draws away votes from the other parties, and could even sort of end up winning a few seats. Here it predicts 0 to 4, which is probably a fair estimate. They might win 4 or 5 seats, or they might win none. And this is, of course, when it's a multi-cornered contest, it's very difficult to predict. The number of seats. Even if you can get the percentage right, the number of seats, you can go all right. But the expectation is that ADMK and Jayalalitha will do very well in Tamil Nadu. And I just want to end, because I want to leave some time for Q&A. I looked at some of these sort of general issues which ties in with this whole game-changing aspect of this election. Let me sort of look at sort of 3 specific ones: BJP, Congress, and Aam Aadmi Party. And this is not my view; this is the perception. So, why it could be BJP game-changing if if BJP under Modi comes to power is BJP Modi being a strong, decisive leader in sort of contrast to Manmohan Singh and the earlier government. Era of economic growth, business and investor-friendly policies. India will sort of gain its rightful place in the world. For the people on the other side of the fence, this could be, they believe this could be catastrophic. For the first time, you have a Hindu hardliner in power, which could, in some ways, spell doom for what they think is the secular and multicultural fabric of India. So that's why the people do think it's a game-changing moment. And let me sort of, I should probably take a stand here now. I left a question mark after game changer in the heading. And I think on this count, I don't see it being a game-changing election. It might not be more of the same. So let me give the reasons. particular in relation to this aspect, why Modi and the BJP. One is, of course, the sort of well-known fact that the BJP, as we're looking at the numbers, won't be able to form a government on its own. So they'll have allies. Some of the allies more in tune with their thinking, but some, if they do end up getting 230 odd seats, there's still 40 or 50 seats that they need. And they'll have to pick up allies like Jayalalitha, ADMK. And these are parties, maybe the BSP and the Mayawati. Could be Trinamool, but Trinamool has issues that we could discuss later. And all these parties are unpredictable, and they will sort of extract their pound of flesh for giving support. So that's so the coalition partners will very likely sort of hedge in well sort of BJP when the BJP comes to power. The other aspect which is not being commented so much upon is the role of the RSS, or the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Again, people are familiar with that. Part of the Sangh Parivar, which is sort of the larger Saffron Brotherhood, sort of the nationalist grouping. They are, they were not on very good terms with Modi, for the past decade or so. But this time it seems, by all accounts, they are going all out, pulling out all stops to get Modi elected. And so the question on what their role will be in the, if it's not a given, if the BJP or the NDA does, it seems to be in pole position. So if they do come to power, what the role of the RSS will be. The RSS, again, people who follow RSS policy are fairly sort of, their policies, they are not for opening up the economy, they have fairly regressive, if you might term it, policies, both on the sort of economic and social front. So what kind of impact will it have on so if people are looking at sort of opening up, liberalization, more investment, what kind of role will the RSS play? So that's one thing one has to keep in mind. And on the last aspect of whether Hindu hardline, of course we do have an early example. The BJP-led grouping did govern India for 5 years under Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So we do have a test case of what could happen when the BJP leads the government. And my former professors, the Rudolphs, had this theory that whenever parties come to power, they tend to sort of become more centrist. And that's the sort of theory a lot of people have applied to the way the Vajpayee government functioned. They really sort of shelved some of the more contentious issues like Ayodhya, scrapping of special status for Kashmir, imposition of uniform civil code. So they did really they put it on the back burner. So now with the BJP under Modi, will it do the same? If you sort of believe in sort of the Rudolph's theory, being in power, being part of a coalition might push them becoming more centrist than even though some people might want to push the national policies, they won't be able to because of the situation they find themselves in. Okay, the second the game-changing aspect specifically is related to Congress, and we saw the predictions. Congress coming down to 100 seats. It sort of spells the end for the Congress, the end of the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty, and some would argue a sort of end to the Congress's policies, which seem to be catering more to rural India. Some would say it sort of feeds into patronage politics, the system of subsidies. Again, I don't think this is Congress might come down. If not 100, they might actually. As I mentioned, the lowest up to now is 114, and then they've actually bounced back, over the next few elections. So they might come down, but I don't think it really spells any kind of sort of end of the Congress. And the dynasty is an interesting aspect. In some ways, it's the Nehru Gandhi family that sort of binds. Even if there are so-called tall leaders in the Congress, they never have the kind of backing that the family has. So in a sense, the family is oddly enough, the stabilizing and unifying force of the party. So again, I don't think it really spells the end of dynasty. And again, we can talk about this aspect of the role of dynasty in Indian politics and how voters relate to it. And I don't think, in any sense, it sort of spells the end not only of dynasty but also sort of Congress policies. And finally, and I really end here, is a few words on ARP. And I think one of the things is, even though ARP, as we saw, might not win, or the predictions are that they might not win too many seats, the feeling is that they might have brought about a fundamental change in the way politics is conducted in India, more transparent. And this is, and here I would sort of tend to argue, and I wouldn't say there's a fundamental change that is brought about, but I think there are incremental changes that this whole ARP phenomenon might have brought to the way politics is conducted in India. Again, it might not translate into seats, but it could have a longer-term impact over the next few years. And often seen as a party of the middle class, and here I would really disagree, in the sense that if you look at the Delhi results, and we can again talk about that, they did get a substantial backing from the marginalized, the poor. So in some senses, their manifesto, their language appeals more to that class rather than to the middle class, which is seen to be sort of identified with the ARP. So that's another factor that needs to be seen. It's not maybe in that sense as a party of the middle class. And the last aspect, again, up for discussion, is the ARP is in some senses occupying the in the opposition space better. Again, I would argue that's not the case yet. But again, up for debate. I'll end here. I think I've gone on for too long. Thank you.